9 nights. That's how long the Carters counted the silence. 9 nights of standing at the edge of the yard, eyes scanning the tree line, waiting for a shadow that never appeared. And every night, Daisy, their golden retriever, sat by the porch, ears, raised nose pressed to the cold air, refusing to leave her post. Koda, the black bear they had raised since she was a cub, had slipped into the wild without warning. And in the Smoky Mountains, silence carries weight. It tells you when something is missing. Koda wasn't just another wild animal that wandered close to a family home. She was more than a passing sighting that so many residents of Tennessee are used to black bears lumbering across driveways or disappearing into the thick oak and hickory forests. She was part of their daily rhythm. Every morning when Ethan Carter opened the back door, Koda would be there, sometimes resting by Daisy, sometimes pacing in slow circles, always watching. For months, she had chosen this family over the wilderness. And then one morning, she was simply gone. No broken fence, no overturned trash bins, just a faint line of paw prints pressed into damp soil leading into the trees, vanishing like breath into mist. The vanishing of a black bear isn't like a missing pet. A pet you call neighbors. You post signs, you search the streets. A wild bear disappearing means something deeper. It means the ancient pull of the forest has whispered louder than the comfort of your fire. And in those moments, families like the Carters are left asking, was she ours to begin with? Or was she only borrowing time from the wild? Ethan walked the edge of the property with a flashlight that first night. His voice broke as he called her name, not because he believed a black bear would come to a call the way Daisy would, but because it was all he could do. Jenna, inside, folded and unfolded the same kitchen towel. Daisy refused food. The absence wasn't just noticed, it was lived in every corner of the house. And that is the truth about animals. We choose to rescue, nurture, or welcome. They change the texture of our days so completely that when they vanish, silence becomes unbearable. Here's something important to understand about black bears in this part of America. They are survivors. They disappear into the forest not as a trick, but because survival demands it. Unlike grizzlies or polar bears that roam open tundra or wide plains, black bears thrive in closeness. Trees, undergrowth, caves tucked into hillsides. They slip away because slipping away is what keeps them alive. So when Koda vanished, the Carters were not just grieving a bond. They were confronting the possibility that she was doing what her blood had prepared her for, answering the call to survive without them. And yet, that knowledge doesn't soothe the ache. Families who live near wildlife often talk about this tension. You can live in the Smokies your whole life, seeing bears in parking lots on back roads, even on your porch, and still never feel the kind of attachment the Carters felt, because theirs wasn't built on sightings. It was built on trust. Trust forged when they first found Koda small and fragile, trembling under fallen snow. Trust deepened when she grew strong enough to follow Daisy step for step across the yard. So when she disappeared, it wasn't just the loss of an animal. It was the loss of a chosen bond, a reminder that no matter how close we grow, wild animals carry secrets we cannot hold. Let me share a perspective many overlook. When we hear of a missing bear, the immediate thought is danger. What if she comes back hungry? What if she wanders too close to homes? These are common fears in communities where black bears roam. But for those who have lived alongside them, another thought comes first. Will she survive out there? Will she find enough food, enough shelter, enough safety? That shift from fear of the wild to compassion for the wild is where real coexistence begins. The Carters learned this quickly. Instead of treating her disappearance as a betrayal, they treated it as a test. Every evening, Ethan still checked the cameras along the tree line. Jenna whispered her name during evening prayers. Daisy sat waiting. The message was simple. Love doesn't end at the forest's edge. It lingers, hoping. And that is a lesson not just about wildlife rescue, but about us, about the way we cling to those who leave, whether they are people, pets, or bears. There's an example that comes to mind. Years ago in Minnesota, researchers tracked a collared black bear mother known as June. For weeks, she disappeared into the back country. Locals assumed she had died, but when she returned, she came with new cubs alive and healthy, having survived storms and scarce food. Her vanishing wasn't abandonment, it was transformation. Stories like June's and now Koda's remind us that disappearance does not always mean the end. Sometimes it means a new chapter has begun out of sight. So, what can we learn from this first, that patience matters? In our lives, silence often feels like loss, but with wildlife and often with family, too, silence can mean growth happening beyond what we can see. Second, that bonds are not erased by distance. The Carter's grief was real, but it was also proof of something profound, that when you open your home to a creature not meant to be tamed, you invite both joy and heartbreak. That risk is the price of connection. And third, that coexistence requires humility. We cannot hold wildlife the way we hold pets. We can only accompany them for as long as they choose. Here's a fresh perspective. The vanishing of Koda wasn't a failure. It was the wild reminding us that not everything we love is ours to keep. In an age when we try to own and control so much land animals, even each other, a bear's disappearance teaches us the radical act of letting go. And perhaps that is why these stories resonate so deeply with people far beyond the Smokies. Because everyone knows what it feels like to lose, to wait, to hope against silence. And yet the mystery remained. Why did she leave then after all those months of choosing the Carters over the woods? Was it instinct? Was it hunger? Or was it something deeper? Something tied to the ancient rhythm of bears in these mountains? No one could answer. The Carters only knew that something had shifted. A door had closed behind her, and the forest had swallowed its secret. But here is the part worth remembering. Silence never lasts forever. Sometimes it breaks in unexpected ways. And for the Carters, the break would come not in the form of a simple return, but with the shock of discovering that Koda had not come back alone. And to understand why her disappearance mattered so much, we need to step back to the beginning, to the storm that almost took her life and the family who chose to save her. The story of Koda didn't start with her disappearance. It began with a storm. One of those Appalachian winters that presses so hard on the Smoky Mountains that even the strongest creatures struggle to endure. Ethan Carter had driven the back road that day, not because he wanted to, but because snow had cut off the main route. What he found wasn't what he expected. Just beyond a fallen pine, something moved in the drift. At first, he thought it was just debris caught by the wind. Then a small paw shifted. A black bear cub barely alive. Koda was no more than 6 months old. At that age, black bears weigh between 15 and 30 pounds. They are still tied to their mothers, still learning to climb forage and follow. They can eat berries, insects, and small prey, but they are not yet hunters. In summer, that's survivable. In winter alone, it's a death sentence. A cub without its mother in February is a cub whose odds have nearly vanished. Ethan didn't have training in wildlife rescue. He wasn't a scientist or a ranger, but sometimes the choice is simple: leave her in the snow or give her a chance. He carried her gently into his truck, wrapped in an old jacket he kept behind the seat. When Jenna saw her, she didn't ask why she only cleared a space by the fireplace. Daisy, their golden retriever, circled nervously, tail down, but eyes fixed on the bundle. That was the first night of a bond that none of them could have predicted. The early hours were fragile. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Jenna fed her with drops of formula through a syringe, wiping her muzzle with a cloth, as if caring for a newborn child. Daisy lay nearby. Paws stretched forward, head resting on them, refusing to look away. Ethan touched her side every few hours, making sure her warmth held. For 2 days it was uncertain, but then on the third morning her eyes opened wider. She blinked at Daisy, and for the first time, something shifted. She didn't flinch, she didn't bare her teeth. She simply accepted the presence beside her. That acceptance became the thread that tied them all together. Here's the thing about rescuing wild animals. Rehabilitation is not meant to replace the wild, it's meant to restore it. Experts will tell you don't imprint, don't turn them into pets. A bear raised like a dog is a danger to itself and to people. But the Carters did something different. They worked closely with a nearby sanctuary, learning how to feed her properly, how to limit contact, how to prepare her for a life she might one day reclaim. Heated blankets were traded for outdoor dens. Syringes gave way to bowls of mashed berries and insects. Every step was a balance between survival and freedom. And yet, despite that careful distance, bonds form. The Carters didn't seek it, but it happened anyway. Daisy became Koda's teacher, not in words, but in patience. When storms rattled the roof, Daisy lay across the hearth until Koda curled into her side. When Jenna walked in the yard, Koda trailed behind Daisy's tail, learning movement by imitation. Ethan saw it most clearly one afternoon. Daisy barked at a crow, and Koda rose onto her hind legs, not with aggression, but with curiosity, copying what she saw. It was as if she were learning two languages at once, one written in the forest, the other written in the home. There's a real-life example worth remembering. In New Hampshire, a wildlife center once raised an orphaned cub found under similar circumstances. With careful monitoring, the cub was released at 1.5 years. Rangers later tracked her, healthy, strong, surviving well in the wild. That success came not from treating her as a pet, but from respecting her instincts while protecting her chance to live. Koda's journey mirrored that balance. The Carters weren't turning her into something she wasn't. They were giving her the bridge to become what she was meant to be. The lesson here is simple but often overlooked. Sometimes saving means stepping back. In life, we often try to hold too tightly to children, to friends, to moments. But survival, whether human or animal, often requires space. The Carters fed Koda, warmed her, kept her alive, but they also prepared her for the day she might not need them. That is real rescue. Not ownership, but release. Here's a fresh perspective. Black bears are often misunderstood in America. To some, they're nuisances raiding trash cans, wandering near cabins. To others, they're icons of the wild. But at their core, they are symbols of resilience. They endure by adapting, by blending into forests, by learning to live alongside human presence. Koda's rescue wasn't just about saving a cub. It was about seeing that resilience up close. Seeing that survival is not just instinct, but also trust. Trust that when help comes, it can be accepted. As the weeks passed, Koda grew stronger. Her muscles filled out, her coat thickened. She climbed low branches in the yard, pawed at Daisy's toys, sniffed at the air, as if memorizing every scent. But every night, she returned to the same blanket by the fire, curling beside Daisy. Ethan sometimes sat nearby, watching quietly. "She's not ours," he would whisper. Jenna always answered no. "But she's here." That distinction mattered. It reminded them that Koda's story was not about possession, it was about presence. Think about this. In the mountains, winters are long, food is scarce, and storms are unforgiving. A 6-month-old cub should never have survived alone. Yet she did, because someone chose to act, because a family chose to open their door, and because a dog chose to stay by her side. That chain of choices built her beginnings. And that chain of choices would one day be tested when she vanished into the wild again. The mystery lingers here. Why did she live when so many others in her situation do not? Was it a chance? Was it instinct? Or was it something else, that fragile, rare moment when human compassion and animal resilience meet in time? No one can answer with certainty. But what's clear is this. Her survival changed everyone who touched it, and yet survival is only the first step. What followed wasn't just recovery, it was transformation. Because once Koda chose to live, she also chose to belong. And belonging for a black bear raised among both wild animals and humans would take a form no one expected. Koda didn't just survive that winter, she began to belong. It didn't happen all at once. At first, she only tolerated Daisy, the golden retriever, who shadowed her every step. Daisy would lie nearby during feedings, tail thumping softly on the floor, while Koda lifted her head only long enough to confirm the dog was still there. But as the weeks unfolded, something shifted. What began as tolerance became trust, and trust became something more. One morning, Jenna entered the sunroom and froze. There on the blanket lay Daisy, still as stone, while Koda curled tightly against her side. Their breathing rose and fell in rhythm, a strange duet of wild and domestic. It wasn't forced, it wasn't trained, it was chosen. From that moment forward, their lives moved together. Here's the explanation: black bears are solitary by nature. They do not live in packs or form extended social groups. Cubs follow their mothers until about 18 months, then disperse. Dogs, by contrast, are pack animals, wired for loyalty, tuned to companionship. So when a black bear cub like Koda forms an attachment to a domestic dog, it is extraordinary. It cuts across instincts, creating a bridge between species that were never meant to share rhythm. Science has tried to explain this kind of bond. Studies of cross-species adoption show that empathy in animals often arises from maternal instincts. Dogs especially are known for extending care beyond their species, nursing kittens, protecting ducklings, even guarding human infants. Daisy, without being asked, became Koda's constant. She licked her ears, nudged her forward when she hesitated, pressed her body against storms until the cub calmed. If survival kept Koda alive, Daisy's presence taught her safety, but this wasn't imitation alone. Soon Koda began to mimic Daisy's behaviors in ways that startled the Carters. When Daisy barked at a squirrel, Koda rose ears, sharp pawing at the same spot. When Daisy chased a ball, Koda followed not with the fluid sprint of a wild predator, but with clumsy steps tumbling into the grass. She didn't know the rules, but she wanted to play. That desire for play, for belonging, was more powerful than instinct. Wildlife rehabilitators once documented a case in Colorado where an orphaned cub bonded with a sheepdog. For weeks, the dog led the cub on walks, showing her safe paths along the farm edges. Later, when released into the wild, the cub demonstrated unusual confidence around humans, but still retained the instincts to forage and climb. That case, like Koda's, showed how bonds across species can shape behavior without erasing identity. Belonging doesn't always follow bloodlines. In families, friendships, even communities, sometimes the bonds that matter most are the ones freely chosen. Koda didn't need Daisy for food or shelter. She needed her for courage. Daisy didn't need Koda for companionship. She had the Carters. But she chose the role of protector anyway. Their bond was not about survival. It was about connection, fresh perspective. Many people fear that when wild animals form bonds with domestic ones, it is dangerous. And yes, risks exist. A black bear cub grows into a powerful adult capable of injuring without meaning to. But what often gets overlooked is the healing power of such bonds. For Koda, Daisy represented stability, and that stability created the conditions for survival. For Daisy, Koda became a purpose beyond the ordinary routines of a family dog. Together, they modeled something rare, that even across species, love can shape behavior. The Carters saw it daily. Koda refused to eat unless Daisy was nearby. She hesitated at door until Daisy entered first. When thunderstorms shook the windows, Koda climbed onto Daisy's back, burying her nose in golden fur until calm returned. And when visitors came, Koda would vanish behind furniture until Daisy walked toward them, wagging her tail. Then Koda would emerge step by cautious step, always keeping Daisy between herself and the world. She wasn't confused. She wasn't pretending to be a dog. She was becoming who she was with Daisy beside her. There's mystery in that transformation. How does a creature born into the wild, shaped by instincts sharpened over thousands of years, decide instead to trust, to follow, to choose companionship? No one can fully explain it, but perhaps that's the point. Some bonds defy explanation because they belong not to logic but to something older, the pull to belong. And this bond wasn't just heartwarming, it carried meaning for the family too. Ethan often said he learned as much from watching Koda and Daisy as he did from raising children years before. They remind me, he whispered once, that home isn't built by walls. It's built by whoever lies down beside you when the storm comes. Jenna felt it too. She saw in their connection a reflection of her own need for family, for chosen bonds after her own childhood of absence. This is what makes stories of wild animals so powerful to us as humans. We see ourselves in them, We see our need for trust, our hunger for connection, our relief when someone stays beside us even when they don't have to. Watching a black bear cub and a retriever breathe in rhythm is like holding a mirror to the truth we rarely say out loud, that none of us survives alone. But with that beauty comes tension. Wildlife experts warn about imprinting that too much comfort with humans and domestic animals can endanger a wild bear if released. It's a risk, and the Carters knew it, but they also saw something else. Koda wasn't losing her wildness. She still froze at the rustle of leaves. She still climbed trees, pawed at insects, and still scanned horizons as if memorizing every sound. She wasn't forgetting the forest. She was adding something new to it. And that is the fresh perspective often missed in conversations about wildlife. We treat wild and domestic animals as separate worlds, but sometimes, for brief seasons, they overlap. And when they do, both sides are changed. Daisy learned patience more deeply than before. Koda learned to trust, which made survival possible. And the Carters learned that the boundary between the wild and the home isn't a wall. It's a bridge that can be walked carefully with respect if both sides choose. So what does this mean for us? That sometimes in our own lives we meet people or animals who don't fit where we expect them. They come from different paths, speak different languages, carry different instincts. And yet, belonging can still be chosen. We don't always have to explain it. We just have to recognize it when it happens and protect it while it lasts. By spring, Koda had grown taller, almost level with Daisy's shoulders. She moved with more grace, more confidence. But every night she still pressed against Daisy's side before sleep. The Carters would stand in the doorway, watching silent. They knew what this meant. Bonds like this don't erase the wild. They prepare it for choices yet to come. And with the thaw of spring, those choices began to stir. Strength brought new instincts. Instincts brought questions, and soon the forest would begin calling Koda towards something no bond could silence. By spring, the snow was gone from the Smoky Mountains, and with it the stillness that had sheltered Koda through winter. She was stronger now, her shoulders filled out, her steps carried weight. Yet with that strength came something else, restlessness. It began subtly. She no longer settled beside Daisy right away in the evenings. She'd linger by the door first, nose pressed to the crack ears, swiveling at sounds only she could hear. When Daisy dozed, Koda paced the yard, stopping at the fence, staring into the dark trees as if the forest itself had called her name. This was instinct, an ancient tide that rises whether or not we invite it. Black bears are solitary creatures, and as cubs grow, they begin preparing for dispersal. Female cubs around 18 months look for their own space, often near their mother's range. Males wander farther, sometimes 20 miles or more. For Koda, the pull was not hunger or fear, it was biology speaking through her blood. A reminder that she belonged to the wild as much as she belonged to the Carters' home. Ethan noticed it first. One afternoon, he found Koda balanced high on a branch in the yard's edge, watching squirrels. She wasn't playing anymore. She was studying. Jenna saw it too, and Koda ignored her food until Daisy finished. The cub that once waited for comfort was now training herself for independence. And Daisy, though still protective, sensed the change. She no longer pressed close during storms. She watched from a few feet away as if permitting distance. Instinct rising doesn't erase bonds, it complicates them. A black bear raised with both wild and domestic influence walks a line between two worlds. And when the forest stirs with the promise of spring, the pull is almost irresistible. That restlessness isn't disloyalty, it's survival rehearsing itself. There's an example worth remembering. In Minnesota, wildlife researchers tracked an orphaned bear named Hope. She had been cared for near human homes, but always lingered close to her mother's old range. As she matured, she began spending nights farther into the forest. Eventually, she stopped returning. It wasn't rejection, it was instinct leading her to carve out her own territory. Stories like Hope's reveal that wild animals, no matter how close to humans, eventually test the boundaries of freedom. The Carters understood this, at least in part. They had worked with the sanctuary from the beginning. They knew Koda wasn't theirs to keep. Yet knowing doesn't always soften the ache of watching someone drift away. Every evening, Jenna found herself glancing at the yard, counting minutes until Koda padded back from the fence. Every evening, Ethan checked the trail cameras for signs of other bears, wondering if one day Koda might follow them instead of returning. And Daisy, faithful Daisy, would press her nose against Koda's shoulder when they sat together on the hill, as if reminding her that this place too was home. Strength often awakens questions we don't expect. For people and for wild animals alike, growing means listening to instincts that sometimes lead us away from what feels safe. For Koda, instinct told her to listen for rustling leaves, to climb higher, to test the horizon. For us, instinct may appear as the urge to take a new path, start over, leave behind what we've known. The lesson is not to fear it, but to recognize that restlessness often signals readiness for more. We often view wild instinct as something dangerous, something to be suppressed. But what if it's not danger, but truth? Koda wasn't turning her back on the Carters. She was remembering the forest rhythm written into her bones long before she knew warmth by the fire. That dual belonging, domestic comfort and wild pull is not a contradiction. It's a reminder that survival and love can exist together, even if they tug in different directions. One evening, Ethan left the back gate unlatched just for a moment. When he returned, Koda was gone. Panic rose, but then he saw her just up the hill behind the house. She hadn't run, she hadn't bolted. She sat quietly, a silhouette against the fading sun. Daisy trotted up and pressed her nose into Koda's fur. Koda didn't move. She only stared at the tree's ears flicking at every hidden sound. For the first time, the Carters saw her hesitate, caught between two worlds. It wasn't an escape. It was a question: was she still theirs, or was the forest waiting? That image stayed with them, and perhaps it stays with us too. Because all of us know what it is to stand at a threshold, one foot in the comfort of what we know, the other, testing the weight of what comes next. Watching Koda on that hill, the Carters weren't just seeing a black bear cub. They were seeing the universal story of growing, of leaving, of asking where we truly belong. And this raised the stakes. The Carters knew instinct wasn't finished. They knew the forest wasn't done calling. What they didn't know was how close that call already was. How soon the wild would step out of the shadows and demand an answer from Koda herself. Because one evening, the forest didn't just whisper to Koda. It appeared at the tree line, low and deliberate, and for the first time she came face to face with what she might have been. The day it happened was ordinary. The air carried spring warmth, the yard alive with birdsong, and Daisy bounding ahead of Koda along the fence line. But ordinary days are when the unexpected slips in. As the sun dropped, shadows stretched long across the field, and from the tree line came movement. Slow, deliberate, a shape that didn't belong in the safety of home. Koda froze, her paws pressed to the soil body, low muscles tense. Daisy kept moving, nose down, chasing the scent of a rabbit. Ethan and Jenna, a few steps behind, saw Koda stiffen before they saw what she saw. Then the form emerged, broad shoulders, heavy steps, eyes locked on the yard. A black bear, not a cub, a full-grown male. Here's the explanation: encounters like this are part of black bear life. Males roam widely, especially in spring, searching for food and mates. They are larger, sometimes double the weight of females, and confident in their dominance. To them, another bear is not automatically kin, it may be competition. For cubs, adult males can be a threat. Instinct tells them to be cautious. And for Koda, who had grown up between two worlds, this was a moment of reckoning. The bear did not charge. He stood at the edge of the trees, head high, nose raised, watching, testing. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Koda's ears pinned back. Her tail flicked once. Every instinct in her body said danger, but another part of her stirred recognition. This was her kind. The wild had appeared not as a whisper, but as a presence. Daisy broke the stillness first. She barked sharp and loud, tail stiff. The male turned his head unbothered, then slipped back into the brush, vanishing without sound. The spell broke, but not for Koda. She didn't chase. She didn't return to play. She ran straight to Daisy, pressing her body close, breathing fast and shallow. Ethan saw it clearly. She had glimpsed what she might become, and she had chosen in that moment not the wild but her companion. In Montana, researchers once tracked a rehabilitated female grizzly, released near Glacier National Park. She had bonded with people during her care, but once free, she faced a wild male. Observers noted her hesitation, not aggression, not curiosity, but conflict. She circled him at a distance, then retreated toward the edges of human camps, avoiding his range entirely. That moment showed how even wild-born animals can struggle between instinct and experience, torn between safety and heritage. Koda's hesitation mirrored that story. The forest called her forward, but love anchored her back. Sometimes what defines us is not what we are born to, but what we choose when tested. For Koda, instinct said approach, but bond said stay. In our lives too, we face moments when something larger, stronger, seemingly inevitable stands before us. Expectations, traditions, even fears, and yet we can choose differently. We can choose connection over compulsion. Many view encounters with wild bears as purely dangerous, and yes, risk is real. Black bears can injure or kill when threatened, but encounters also reveal something else, the raw honesty of nature. The male bear was not malicious. He was being what he was, a wild animal, living by instinct. Koda's reaction was not weak. It was clarity. She saw both paths, the solitary, instinct-driven life of her kind and the chosen bond she had formed. The presence of that wild bear forced her to weigh them. We rarely witness such a choice so clearly in the life of an animal. For the Carters, the encounter deepened the mystery. They had always known the wild might reclaim Koda. But seeing her face, it directly made the possibility real. Ethan replayed the moment in his mind that night, the way her muscles locked, the way she pressed against Daisy after. Jenna whispered in bed, "She's torn." Daisy perhaps knew best. She sat close to Koda for hours, nose resting against her shoulder, as if anchoring her to the world she had already chosen. What does this tell us about coexistence, that living near wild animals means living with questions that may never be answered? People in Appalachia often share stories of bears, one raiding a bird feeder, another crossing the road at dusk. But what they rarely see is this kind of conflict within the animal itself. For Koda, the forest was not just a landscape, it was an inheritance. Yet inheritance can be questioned. She had been given another path, one written not in instinct, but in choice. And maybe that is the deeper mystery, how love can make even instinct pause. Biologists can map behavior chart ranges and explain dispersal patterns. But they cannot explain why a black bear cub face-to-face with a wild male would turn away and press against a golden retriever instead. That is something science alone cannot hold. That belongs to story, to spirit, to the part of us that knows some bonds defy explanation. Here's a thought: in our own lives, the wild appears too. Sometimes it is an opportunity. Sometimes it is dangerous. Sometimes it is the unknown standing at the edge of our comfort. Like Koda, we freeze. We weigh instinct against connection, and often the choice reveals who we are more than instinct ever could. The Carters never forgot that evening. It was not dramatic. There was no fight, no chase. Just a silent appearance and a quiet retreat. Yet it changed everything. Afterward, Koda spent more time by the windows at night, ears twitching, eyes locked on the tree line. The wild had shown itself. She had chosen differently once, but how many times could she choose? And within days, the answer came. Because one morning, the Carters woke to find the yard empty. No paw prints on the porch, no shadow by Daisy's side. The gate is still closed. The wild had called, and this time Koda had vanished into it. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Daisy woke first, nose pressed against the back door, ears rigid. Ethan reached for the latch and felt it even before he opened it absent. The yard was empty. No paw prints in the soil, no shadow waiting near the fence. The gate was closed. Somehow Koda had slipped into the wild without leaving a trace. At first, denial carried them. Jenna called her name across the yard as if a black bear cub would answer like a dog. Ethan checked the cameras along the tree line, scrolling through frames of empty grass and flickering shadows. Daisy refused food, pacing in circles on the porch. Hours passed, then a full day. Still no sign. The bond that had felt unshakable was broken not by choice, but by silence. Black bears often leave without warning. As cubs reach maturity, instinct drives them to test independence. Females begin searching for ranges of their own, often close to their birth territory. Males wander much farther. Disappearance for them is not betrayal. It is survival rehearsed. For Koda, it was biology. But for the Carters, it was heartbreak. Jenna walked the edge of the property each morning, calling softly, scanning for paw prints. Ethan left food near the fence line, though he knew it could draw other wild animals. Daisy curled around Koda's blanket in the sunroom, sometimes carrying one of her toys to the door as if waiting to trade it back. The rhythms of daily life stalled. Meals went untouched, nights stretched, long silence filled corners once shaped by her presence. This is not unusual. Families who live near wildlife often describe the same pattern. An animal you come to know, even love, vanishes into the forest. Sometimes they reappear weeks later, stronger, older, changed. Sometimes they do not return at all. The forest takes them back, reminding us that they were never ours to hold. An example comes from the Cherokee stories of these very mountains. In their tradition, the black bear is more than an animal. It is a teacher, a being that moves between worlds. Some tales describe bears as former humans choosing the forest as their home. Others say they carry medicine, teaching a balance between wildness and family. When Koda disappeared, it echoed those stories. To the Carters, her vanishing wasn't just a loss. It was a lesson written into the land. The wild does not belong to us. It only visits. Love that includes freedom is deeper than love that clings. To rescue an animal is to give it back to life, not to keep it captive in ours. Ethan and Jenna wrestled with this truth every day. They had kept Koda alive, given her warmth, given her trust, but the very act of saving her also meant one day she would leave. In a way, the disappearance was proof they had done it right. She had grown strong enough to go. We often measure love by presence, who stays, who sits beside us, who returns our calls. But sometimes love is measured by absence, by the space we allow when someone chooses another path. The Carters could have locked her and built stronger fences and treated her like a pet. Instead, they gave her the dignity of choice. Her vanishing hurt, but it was also an honor. It meant she carried both survival and freedom. Still, grief is not erased by logic. Nights grew heavy. Daisy whimpered in her sleep pause, twitching as if chasing someone no longer there. Jenna prayed not for Koda's return, but for her safety. Ethan checked the cameras obsessively, even when he knew there would be nothing. The house, once alive with movement, felt hollow. This is what it means to live beside wild animals. You live with uncertainty. You live with the ache of not knowing. And yet you live with wonder too, the knowledge that every glimpse, every bond is a gift, not a guarantee. For the Carters, the disappearance became both wound and reminder. They had not lost her. They had simply released her. But the story was not finished. Days stretched into nights, nights into a week. Still Daisy waited at the porch. Still Jenna folded and unfolded the same blanket. And then, on the 9th night, silence broke. It was past midnight when Daisy lifted her head, eyes locked on the back door. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She simply waited. Because someone was about to return from the forest, and this time Koda would not come back alone. It was the 9th night. Just after midnight, Daisy lifted her head. No sound came from her throat. No bark. No growl. She stood, body tense, ears locked on the back door. Jenna stirred from the couch where she had dozed with a blanket pulled to her chin. She saw Daisy still in waiting. Then she heard a faint shuffle across the porch, softer than the wind. When the door opened, the cold air rushed in. At first only darkness, then movement. Koda stepped into the porch light, thin mud streaking her fur and ear-torn, jagged ribs sharp against her coat. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were steady. She didn't move toward Jenna. She looked past her. Daisy rushed forward, nosing into her side. Koda pressed back weakly but firmly, not flinching, not resisting. And then came the shock. Out of the dark, two smaller shapes staggered forward. Cubs, barely 6 weeks old, scruffy, trembling. One limped, the other clung close to Koda's leg. Wide eyes reflected the porch light, uncertain, afraid. Koda turned her head once to check on them, then back to Daisy. She had not just returned, she had brought life with her. Here's the explanation. Female black bears usually breed every 2 years. Cubs are born in winter dens, blind and helpless, weighing less than a pound. Through hibernation, mothers nurse them, surviving only on stored fat. By spring, cubs emerge still fragile, still fully dependent. A mother's instinct is fierce. She defends them at risk of her own life. That Koda had kept 2 cubs alive through weeks of disappearance while injured herself was a testament to the strength buried in her blood. The Carters moved quickly. They cleared space in the sunroom, layering blankets, setting bowls of softened food. The cubs, later named Scout and Luna, stayed pressed to their mother, at first skittish at every sound. Daisy approached slowly, lowering her head. To everyone's surprise, Koda allowed it. She let Daisy lick the cubs' ears curl around them when they whimpered. It wasn't hesitation, it was peace. In 2015, researchers observed a female black bear with a torn ear raise 3 cubs despite injuries from a fight with a male. She led them across rivers, foraged for roots, and defended them against coyotes. All 3 cubs survived into fall, a rare success. Koda's return with 2 cubs echoed that resilience. Against odds, she had chosen not only survival but motherhood, and she had chosen to share that with the family who once rescued her. Strength is not only in independence but in protection. For Koda, leaving had been necessary. Returning was a choice. She could have vanished deeper into the mountains, raising her cubs unseen. Instead, she brought them back to the only safety she trusted: Daisy and the Carters. Love, when tested by instinct and wilderness, had proven strong enough to guide her home. Many would see this story as impossible, even reckless. A black bear returning with cubs to a human household. Isn't that dangerous? And yes, in most cases, wild animals do not blur boundaries this way. But here, the return shows something profound. Coexistence isn't about taming or owning. It's about trust built over time, rare but real. The wild didn't erase Koda's bond, it deepened it. By choosing to bring her cubs, she was declaring that love and survival could stand together. The days that followed were filled with small miracles. Scout and Luna, once skittish, began to play in the sunroom, tumbling over Daisy's tail, climbing over Koda's paws. Daisy adopted them as her own, nudging them awake, licking their heads, lying protectively through thunderstorms. Koda healed slowly, the torn ear never regaining shape, a permanent mark of the days she had faced alone. But her eyes softened. She no longer lingered at the window in conflict. She settled in the grass with Daisy and her cubs, watching them tumble. For Jenna, the return reshaped everything. She realized Koda hadn't left because she was abandoning them. She left because instinct demanded it, because she was carrying something greater back with her. Ethan saw it too. She came back. He whispered one evening, not as a cub needing rescue, but as a mother bringing life. What does this mean for us? That sometimes disappearance is not the end, it is preparation. In life, we grieve when someone leaves, when silence replaces presence. But often what feels like loss is a transformation happening beyond sight. When the return comes, it carries more than we expected. Koda's story reminds us that what vanishes can come back, not diminished, but multiplied. There's a mystery here too. How did she keep them alive in the wild? How did she find food while wounded? Did she hide them in a den or carry them through storms? No one will ever know. The forest keeps its secrets. What matters is what she chose when she stepped back into the porch light. She chose trust. She chose family. And yet even as joy filled the Carters' home, a larger truth remained. Bonds like these remind us of something bigger than a single bear or a single family. They remind us of coexistence, of responsibility, of the fragile balance between wilderness and home. And that truth would carry them into the final chapter of Koda's story. Evenings on the Carter porch were different now. Where once Daisy and Koda had rested side by side, there were now 4 bodies tangled in the grass. 1 golden retriever, 1 black bear mother, and 2 cubs tumbling over them both. Scout pawed at Daisy's ear. Luna climbed across Koda's back. Daisy tolerated every scratch, every niptail sweeping slowly through the grass. Koda watched quietly, occasionally nudging 1 cub closer, sometimes pressing her head against Daisy in silent gratitude. The sight was simple, but it carried something more. It carried the weight of a truth few get to witness, that wild animals given trust and safety can choose bonds that defy instinct. Here's the explanation. Black bears are not pack creatures. They do not share dens or raise cubs collectively. Once grown, they live solitary lives, meeting only to breed or defend territory. Cubs learn by imitation from their mothers, not by community. Yet what unfolded here was something different. Koda's cubs were learning not only from her, but from Daisy. They mirrored the retriever's calmness around humans, her comfort with routine, her joy in play. This was not natural in the sense of instinct. It was natural in the sense of chosen environment. And it showed that animals like people adapt not just to survival, but to love. Wildlife sanctuaries across the U.S. sometimes report cross-species comfort, an orphaned fawn bonding with a farm dog, a rescued fox sharing space with domestic cats. One well-documented case in Virginia told of a black bear cub raised alongside hounds. Instead of aggression, the cub grew calm, eventually released back to the wild, strong and unafraid. These moments do not erase the wildness. They reveal that coexistence is possible when approached with patience and respect. Koda's story was a living example unfolding not in a sanctuary, but in the backyard of an ordinary family. Family is not only blood. Family is who stays, who protects, who returns even after silence. Koda left when instinct demanded it, but she came back carrying new life, placing trust not in fences but in the bond she had built. That bond did not erase her wild nature, it gave her a place to rest it. For us, the same holds. Belonging often comes not from where we start, but from who we choose when storms arrive. Knowledge deepens the wonder. Black bears across North America number in the hundreds of thousands, making them the most widespread of all bear species. Yet survival for cubs is never guaranteed. Nearly half of all cubs born in the wild do not live past their first year. Predators, hunger, accidents, and harsh winters take them. That Koda's cubs stood alive on the Carter's porch was nothing short of a miracle. And that miracle carried a reminder. Every bear that survives carries an ecosystem with it. They scatter seeds through forests, control insect populations, and shape landscapes by their very presence. When we protect black bears, we protect the forests themselves. But the emotional truth runs deeper still. For Jenna, the sight of Scout and Luna climbing over Daisy was a form of healing. She whispered often that it felt like grace. For Ethan, it was proof that their choice months before to rescue a half-frozen cub had rippled into something larger than themselves. For Daisy, it was simple. She had gained a pack that looked nothing like her, yet felt wholly hers. And for Koda, it was peace. After the long silence of absence, she had returned to the only home she trusted, bearing the proof of survival, not for herself, but for her cubs. Too often we see the line between wild and human as a barrier, a place where danger begins. But perhaps it is more of a threshold. Wildlife does not always need to be distant for us to respect it. Sometimes, as with Koda, coexistence means recognizing both truth and tenderness. She was still a bear, still wild, still powerful, still belonging to the forest. Yet she also carried bonds with a family and a dog that made her story possible. This isn't a contradiction, it's a reminder. The natural world isn't fixed in categories. It's fluid, adapting, surprising, teaching us lessons we would miss if we only kept our distance. So, what do we take away from this? That resilience often hides in unexpected places. That love can cross boundaries of species, of instinct, of silence. That survival is not only about enduring storms, but about who you walk beside once the storm has passed. And that our role as people who share land with wild animals is not to control or claim, but to honor, protect, and learn. Think for a moment about your own life. Who has been your daisy, your companion that stayed beside you through storms? Who has been your Koda, the one who vanished only to return carrying something greater than you imagined? And when have you been the cub? Fragile, uncertain, in need of someone to shield you until you could stand alone. These questions linger not only as a story, but as a mirror, because in watching bears, we are reminded of ourselves. And this is where reflection leads to action. Stories like Koda's are rare, but the truth of wildlife is not. Across the United States, black bears still walk forests, forage in valleys, and climb mountains. They thrive only when habitats are protected, when people respect their space, and when sanctuaries and rescues are supported. Every choice we make, securing trash, supporting conservation groups, teaching children to respect wild animals, shapes whether the next Koda survives. Here is the mystery we are left with. Why did she come back? Why did she trust not only herself but Daisy the Carters, the fragile line between wild and human? We may never know. But perhaps that is the point. Some stories are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried like quiet lanterns, guiding us toward better ways of living with the creatures that share our world. If this story touched you, pause for a moment. Reflect on your own bonds, on the companions who shaped your journey, on the silences that later returned with gifts. Then carry that reflection into action. Support the sanctuaries, protect the forests, honor the wild. And if you believe these stories matter, if you believe love and resilience are worth sharing, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us again. Because more stories are waiting. Stories of bears, of wildlife, of wild animals that remind us who we are. Stories that prove family is not only blood, it is who stays, who protects, and who returns.